Hello everybody, this is Blake from the Nautical Pulse. Thanks for following my blog. I have the privilege of sitting in with Clay Young, Colorado resident and sailor, for a brief podcast regarding the modern sailor. Clay, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
All right, so why don't you go ahead and tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do for a living, and what occupies your free time?
Well, for the last 16 years, I worked for Poudre Valley Hospital as a paramedic. Right now, I do a little bit more driving a desk and managing volunteers in special events than I do riding in an ambulance and
Absolutely.
going to 911 calls. But it's a lot of fun. Really love my job. And my free time I spend between my family and working on projects around the house and on some of our hobbies, which includes a boat at this point in time.
Okay, very good. Have you been in Colorado your whole life, or have you moved out a bit?
I moved here in 1981 when I graduated from high school, attended CSU, and I moved away in 1985 to Maine and lived in Maine until '93 when I moved back here.
Okay, I guess it goes without saying then that you probably got started in boat building out when you lived on the East Coast.
Yep, I did in Blue Hill, Maine. When I moved out there and started working in house construction and carpentry. I'd always been interested in woodworking and dabbled in woodworking even when I was a kid. I had a shop in the basement, and I got a job via my sister's boyfriend at the time at Weber Co. Boatyard in East Blue Hill, and they were a fiberglass down east lobster boat style boatyard, and they would build fiberglass hulls and decks. That was the primary industry there, but they also had a yacht yard, and I worked in that yacht yard. So when you work in a yacht yard, you do a little bit of everything, and it wasn't a very big crew, so there were only two of us that were carpenters or joiners that worked there. But we got to do a little bit of everything from rigging to moving boats to docking boats and fixing different things in the boats, winterizing, cover frames, everything that you would normally do in a boatyard in Maine.
All right. How many years would you say that you worked as a boat builder, either specifically for Weber Co. or as a private builder?
Probably most specifically just boat building. As my primary industry, probably about 10 years. In the other times that I've been doing construction, mainly doing cabinets and furniture, because the industry obviously out in Colorado isn't as busy as it is back in Maine for boat building.
Absolutely, there's a much smaller supply and demand.
Right.
Okay, so where would you say that boat building and sailing fits in your life today? How do you sail in Colorado? I feel like a lot of people are always laugh when you say that you're a sailor and you're from Colorado, being a primarily landlocked state.
Well, I think the most people that say that probably don't know a lot about sailing, and or they haven't spent a lot of time in Colorado, because the one thing that most people think about in Colorado is there's no water, but there's actually water all over the place. We have large lakes. We've got Lake McConaughey, we've got Lake Powell, we've got Granby Lake, we've got plenty of little recreational lakes around. That's where a lot of really good sailing is found. The other thing you really need for sailing is wind, which Colorado has tons of wind.
We do have a surplus.
Yeah, and so there's great sailing in Colorado, and also even in the smaller lakes, it's fun, and there's lots of there's actually sailing clubs in Colorado, and you can take modern American Sailing Association classes in Denver. So.
How big of a boat do you think you could get out on some of the lakes here in Colorado?
You could probably get pretty big. A lot of the boats, they make a lot of shoulder aft boats, and I think the depth of the water has a lot to do with what is here. I think the majority of the boats that you see, they probably don't exceed around 30 feet. You might occasionally see something a little bit bigger than that up in Fraser, maybe on Lake Granby, but 22 to 24 foot sailing boats, pretty common.
All right. What are some of the boats that you've worked on in the past? Are they about that size? Are they bigger? Are they smaller? Do you do wood boats, fiberglass boats, any of the Kevlar, carbon fiber?
Combination of all those things. When I first started at Weber Cove, we built, like I said, a fiberglass boat it had a balsa core. It was out of a yard that it's really got its start building mine sweepers, wooden mine sweepers back in the war, and so it had a lot of old construction. It was there right when fiberglass got started. So even though fiberglass was not maybe the primary medium for construction at the time, they were right there during that time period when it all started to evolve. So those boats were fiberglass and polyester resin and core materials. A lot of the boats that we worked on there were either traditional wooden craft, Concordias, Hirschoff. They had quite a few smaller craft of classic design, small craft there, 12.5s, and Marshall cat boats, lots of very nice designs. When I left that company to start my own business, before I even had time to have lights installed in my shop's ceiling, we had a Kuan Yin, which was a cutter built by Choi Lee. It was a Laurent Gals design, and we actually installed the lights in the shop off of the deck. And that boat was just being refit, so it got a new Dynel deck, and it got new lots of just fixing up of stuff that goes wrong on an old wooden boat. In that shop, I worked on Concordia sloop boats, aluminum, did some finishing on an aluminum lobster boat. We built a Ian Ferry design F-31, which is a racing trimaran that we set up for cruising. Built that from the ground up. Canoes, small craft, and then detailed parts for Senta, which was a 52-foot Philip Rhodes cutter that was built in 1938 that the owner and Bruce McKenzie from the Rockwell Apprentice Shop and myself all worked on together to get back in the water, which is a really, really very, very cool project.
So I would go without saying then that you have some expertise in restoration, building and design, and maybe a little outdated in that sense, just because it's been a while since you were active in that industry. But definitely some of those traditional styles definitely stick with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of had best of both worlds because the Ian Ferrier design F9A was brand new, cutting edge, modern technology. Some of the technology that we used in that boat had never been used before in boat building. Using some of the compounds that they use for covering boats with very brand new compounds, and working with the research and development of companies like West Marine or West System Epoxy, and Interlux, and through RP Associates, and it was a very interesting project. It was fun. It was a fun project, and then the Philip Rhodes cutter was basically a restoration from the original specs with all original materials, and it was as much wooden boat building as you can get for wooden boat building. Of course, we took advantage of modern glues like epoxy, and
absolutely.
But it was bronze. We took all the stainless off and went all the way back to silicon bronze. So it was a very fun project.
Absolutely, that sounds great. Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about your boat that you have? I believe the boat's name is Sundown.
Yeah, Sundown was actually a boat. The first time I saw this model of boat was working at Weber Cove Boatyard, and it was a brand new boat, same year. It was going up to Montreal, Canada, and it had been in the States for just a couple of years, and the owner had brought it up to have a couple things looked at, and so I was enamored with the design right away. Just identified it as a really nice heavy displacement blue water cutter. Looked very, very comfortable. I'm not a big sailboat racer. I believe in real comfortable boats, and so this one really kind of appealed to me. And when we got it out of the water, how it looked out of the water was just as pretty as it was in the water. All the lines under the water line were very, very nice. And so I'd always been intrigued and wanted to have one of these. And several years ago, my wife and I discussed looking at sailing, cruising as a retirement plan because of a lot of people think it's very expensive, and it can be expensive, but really it's more a way to reduce your actual spending because you don't have property that you have to pay taxes on and maintain and upkeep. You have a boat that you maintain and upkeep, and that keeps you well, and you keep it well, and it moves you around. And then,
in your case, it sounds like 33 feet to maintain and upkeep.
Yeah.
Seems very reasonable to me.
Yeah, it is very reasonable. And so when we chartered another Hans Christian, which is a 43-foot boat out of Bellingham, and my wife liked it, and she enjoyed sailing on it, and it was comfortable, and she could identify things that she liked and things that she didn't like, and I knew that there were some interesting aspects of the design of this 33-foot Hans Christian that would be an improvement over the things that she did not like on the 43, and we happened to stumble upon one that had landed in Duluth, Minnesota, and it was at a very good price and had the normal things that would be wrong with a boat that's 30 years old. And so we took the plunge and bought it, and are currently in the process of restoring it.
All right, those kinds of problems you mentioned. Those are problems that you're familiar with working alongside using your past experience in restoration. Then is
absolutely,
what it sounds like.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Does recently, probably since about the late '90s, following the TBT scare, tributylene as a anti-fouling and moving away from some of those traditional bronze, moving into a stainless, changing designs, moving to a fin keel or a ballast keel. Away from that full keel design of a traditional wooden craft, based on the allowance for some of those new materials, the fiberglass, using epoxy, kind of did away with some of those negative impacts that those building practices could have on the environment. And so this idea of being eco-conscious when it comes to sailing kind of fits into that mold a lot. You know, you're using wind power, you're not having to use diesel all the time. That you get with a lot of those big motor yachts, and so that whole being economically sustainable definitely falls into that sailing category. So how does being eco-conscious fit into your scheme as a sailor and as a craftsman? And is that something that you're aware of, or do those traditional practices take more value to you due to their effective process?
I think it's always it's an evolution. Even from when I started, I mentioned Weber Cove Boatyard. When I started working there, they had a little dock out of the back of the building where they had an outhouse, and the outhouse was just a hole through the wood that went down into the bay. And right next to that, where you walked out, was a big pile, like an 8-foot tall pile of polyester resin and gel coats that were just dumped there, because at the time there was no real control over environmental protection. Or wetlands protection, or the shore. All that stuff was inactive when I worked there. But from that point moving forward, we've seen huge improvements in reduction of, to low VOC and minimalized use of. They're still using toxic chemicals in building boats. There's no way to get away from that. Even wooden boats back in the day, they were coated with red lead paint. They're going with lighter materials, less materials, trying to recapture materials as opposed to just blatantly wasting stuff. As far as sailing, to me, I think it's a great way to reduce our carbon footprint, because you can really minimize your that whole diesel thing. I do have a diesel motor because that's what the power plant that goes in that boat is. It's also 24,000 pounds, and they don't at this time make any type of electric motors that are going to drive it. But that's not the primary reason is to have a sailboat that I'm going to drive around with a diesel motor.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
It's got sails that are going to move around, and our biggest desire is to reduce that carbon footprint by using as little diesel fuel, which is our biggest expense, as possible by generating electricity via wind and solar, and even mechanical production by bike pedaled generators or propeller drag propellers through the water behind the boat to turn an alternator to charge batteries. Anything that can recapture the force of not having diesel going, but will allow us electricity.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point too. Let's take note that wind and solar energy is definitely becoming more predominant, even in the American home, as it is as well out on the ocean, where you have a surplus, it seems, of wind, which we would hope for in a sailing vessel, and solar exposure. So are those ecologically friendly solutions something that you're wary of as you're restoring Sundown, or are you trying to maintain some of those traditional aspects to the boat?
All of the traditional aspects of the boat that I'm trying to maintain are purely aesthetic. They're the teak that came with the boat, the bronze that came with the boat, those the lines and the things that you see and you put your hands on, the warmth, and that makes that boat what it is, the emotions that it is. The things that I'm fixing are all of those things that make it expensive to run: incandescent lighting, pumps that use more energy than other pumps, redesigning the electrical system so that it is self-sustaining as opposed to something that requires the diesel motor speed to run all the time to keep things charged up. So.
Okay, and those and I love that you used the word improvements earlier when talking about some of those advances as opposed to backward steps. So concerning that category of anti-fouling, I've gotten a chance to look at your vessel up close, and I know that you're going to be corn blasting the bottom eventually, stripping that down and recoating the exterior of the hull with different paints, and I don't know, maybe changing the color a little bit. What are some other alternatives to those traditional organic metallic polymers that are traditionally linked with anti-fouling? Those lead-based, those copper-based paints that you might have seen, hydrogels, viscous coatings, the self-peeling ablative paints, organically derived coatings. Do those weigh into your decision at all?
Oh, absolutely. They're for two reasons. One is they've been, the sale. When I first got into boat building, the sale of bottom paint that was toxic, and I think at the time it might have been lead-based paint.
Yeah.
You couldn't buy it in the United States, and people would mail order it from Canada, or they drive to Canada to get this paint because it was the best paint, and then we that's what their impression was, that it was the best paint. Okay. But really, what it comes down to, I've seen boats time after time after time, they come out of the water hanging in the slings in the slipway there's tons of boats that come out of the water and the bottoms are all clean. I can guarantee the one thing that they all have in common is that they get used, they get sailed, they get moved around. The ones that sit and don't move, they get all sorts of growth on the bottom of them. If you're a sailboat racer and you're really trying to race, and you need to have you have this opinion that the bottom of your boat has to be very clean, because when you go out and sail it, you heel over, and the people, your co-workers or your co-racers, are going to see the bottom of your boat as it's heeled over. Well, if you sail your boat, the bottom of your boat's going to be clean, so there's really should not be a concern. That's really the best way to do it, is just go sail your boat, and leave it sitting on the mooring.
And that's due to the nature of the paint that you're applying on there as it is, right? It's that self-peeling. It's that rejecting that marine life from growing on there.
Yeah. Well, the poisonous bottom paints, marine life grows on it, just dies, and then more stuff grows on the dead stuff, and more stuff grows on the dead stuff. It just peels off very easily. You can take it off with a pressure washer. If you had nothing on there at all, no ablative effect, it's going to bond fairly well. But even just bare gel coat works fairly well. I guess my opinion is I really like a lot of the ideas of having a low VOC non-toxic paint that just wears away slowly. That's hard, but that wears away slowly. That's some of the ones that I've looked at. And I have to admit I'm a couple of years away, but I'll wait for 2 years to get the bottom paint because I think there's going to be huge improvements. You know, it's the same reason I'm not buying navigation equipment to navigate across my prairie dog field right now. I'm going to wait. It's an aesthetic point at this point because you can see the bottom, but it'll be a functional point when we put the boat in the water because it's expensive to apply. It's something that you're going to have to reapply again, and you don't want to put something on that's you're going to have to reapply the next year. Mm-hmm. And you want something that works, at the very least, to keep things from fouling up on your instruments. I think is probably the most important. So it'll be something I'll research a lot more when the time comes, and it'll be driven by what the environmentalists say for sure.
Okay, where are you doing most of your research at?
One of my biggest places to do research right now is Practical Sailor. They do a lot of testing, price comparisons. They do real non-biased product testing where they have a 3-year plan and then they put all of their test panels back in and they go for a 4-year plan and a 5-year plan, and so they can tell you what those paints look like that far out, and so you can plan for what the costs are, and you can plan for what the impact is of those paints on your vessel and what they are. You know, what they're trying new products. There's new products all the time, trying to be environmentally sound.
Okay. Well, are there any specific paints that you're focusing on, that you're interested, that you're tracking right now as maybe a primary candidate for Sundown?
Not necessarily. It's just like I said. I mean, I'm not thinking that there's any particular brand or type that I'm going to, that I want to do, that I want to use right now. Just like I said, 2 years, I'm going to really, really look at it because that's, I would rather wait for the technology to get better.
Okay. All right. So it sounds like the industry is still growing. There's always the advancement. There's always the technological movement in that industry of boat building, which I think is very traditional to maritime exploration. The whole reason humanity started to sail in the first place, traveling longer distances over larger bodies of water to explore new worlds, so to speak.
Well, Clay, thanks for being here and taking the time out of your day. We'll be sure to continue to follow Sundown's voyage from Colorado to the coast, and you bloggers can follow along as well. Just follow the Sundown link on the sidebar of the main page. This is Blake with the Nautical Pulse. Clay, thanks again for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's my pleasure.